If there's one thing that PSO Episode 3 has a lot of, it's the amount of characters you meet in the story. I've already made a video about the main story in this game, and despite it being very long, there was more that I decided not to include. Specifically, the stories for the remaining 15 characters I didn't bring up. None of their stories are as in-depth as the main characters, but I wouldn't be doing the game justice if I didn't cover everyone else that you meet. You don't need to watch the entire previous video to understand everything in this one, but if you need a refresher on the main story, I'd recommend watching at least the introduction. There's also a few side characters I won't be bringing up here since they were close enough to the main story that they were covered plenty in the last video. With that out of the way, let's finish up covering the rest of the party. With the varying degrees of detail that the remaining characters have, I've decided to order them from most to least in-depth. The first 3 groups have quite a bit of development throughout the game and will definitely take the most time to cover. The following 2 are still pretty interesting to see, and the remaining characters definitely exist and are in the game. But our list begins at the very top, primarily focusing on the Hunter Training Center. Shortly into the story on the Hunter's side, you're introduced to a girl and her butler. The girl, Viviana, is from the HTC, or the Hunter Training Center, and despite being a fledgling hunter, she assures you not to worry about her as she has the skills. Standing next to her is Teifu, who's been by Viviana's side for over a decade but isn't much of a fighter himself. Not only does he specifically request you not to deploy him anywhere, he brings up how he allows Viviana to treat him like a personal punching bag. Despite this, he has great respect for her and assures you that you won't suffer the same fate. Viviana brags about her combat prowess back in the HTC, saying that she was nearly unbeaten in simulation fighting, except for another girl there named Memoru, who you just happened to meet at the same time on the ARC side. She's a bit of a hothead and is proud to bring up her nearly unbeaten record in the HTC. Unbeaten except for Viviana, of course. Memoru says she left after Viviana started getting a bit too chummy with her, and then she subsequently blames you for getting pissed off again for remembering it. The HTC is really bringing their best, but at the same time, both girls give you the same request, which is to be deployed at the Tower of Kylum. They both have fond memories of that place, but surprise surprise, they meet at the same spot. And as hunters and arcs do when they see one another, they duke it out. Viviana is pissed off to learn that her former teammate is with the Arcs, Memoru is pissed off and almost starts a fight with you, and Teifu becomes a convenient way for his lady to channel her anger. He starts to tear up, not from the violence, but at the idea of the 2 students reconciling. How cute. We also hear something about a pendant of sorts, which is supposed to currently be in Memoru's possession. We also hear about the master of both students when they were at the HTC, a hunter named Saligun. Oh, and look who we meet shortly after. Saligun is a nurse-turned-fighting instructor from the HTC who actually shows up in the in-game tutorial if you ever decided to check that out. She talks about her former students a little, finding it sad that they both joined opposing organizations, especially since they were friends since childhood. After seeing the 2 of them argue some more, Saligun wants to find a way to mend their friendship. At some point, Teifu catches wind of his master going off on her own to confront Memoru, and despite being a simple butler, fights past his cowardice and helps rescue her. After receiving a complimentary beating from her afterwards, Viviana does let out a small thanks for his help, and understandably, he's over the moon about it. Teifu is a simple man after all. That said, things are about to take a turn for the worse as the Arcs officially begin their attack on the Hunter's lab. Saligun finds the timing very bad on this and explicitly does not want the 2 students to see each other during the attack. Viviana is ready to show her master what she's capable of and for the time being pushes away any thoughts of reconciliation with Memoru. The same goes for the other side, with Memoru stopping herself from getting too emotional at the thought of seeing Viviana. This pendant is brought up once again, with the latest allegation being Viviana was the one that broke it. While the 2 of them didn't end up fighting during the attack on the lab, we all know the other events that transpire and the shape that the lab is left in. Saligun considers herself a failure as their teacher for letting their fighting go on for so long. But with the 2 of them going off to argue yet again, she's ready to put her foot down. And what better way to shock 2 kids back into reality than to say, quote, "I may end up dying soon." Needless to say, that knocked some sense into the both of them, and finally, both students make up. And as for the whole pendant business, way back when, Saligun purposely broke it in half so that each of her students had a section of it, so it just ended up being a whole misunderstanding from both sides. But with that out of the way, for Viviana and Memoru, they're ready to finish up any business they have within their respective organizations. But after that, the two of them are going to spend some more time with each other and start to become friends once again. As for Teifu, he couldn't be happier to see his master make up with her friend. And it also sounds like she no longer beats him up, so ultimately it's a win for everybody. And that's how their story ends. You might start to notice a pattern that some of the characters in this video end up better than how they started. It's a very stark contrast to some of the main characters, but I guess the game needed something a little heartwarming. Our next story takes place only on the hunter's side and is between two characters. The first one you meet is a humanoid named Stella. She's got a curious way of speaking, but claims to be really good at combat analysis and running. So she sounds like a real champion right off the bat. We then come across Glustar, who has a real need for cash since he immediately wants to start gambling with you. So we've got a real couple of winners here by the looks of it, but we're just getting started. As time goes on, you hear that Glustar is taking a liking to Stella, as he ends up treating her better than anyone else. But in an attempt to make some more cash, he tries striking a deal with the wrong people and gets caught by the Arcs. Despite Stella saving Glustar and being very much against putting himself in danger again, he continues to try to make more backroom deals and hides the specifics from her. But he does still care for her safety, asking you directly to not deploy her so she's not put in any danger. He also asks if you want to gamble again. Stella continues to notice Glustar going off to make more deals, and despite her best efforts, she can't convince him to give it up. Much like how he pulled you aside, Stella doesn't want him to go off on any more missions, thinking he's just gonna put himself in more danger. But Glustar then shares a little bit more about her history that he learned. Stella is actually a defective humanoid who spent a lot of her life in an abusive facility after being thrown out. The one person in her life that treated her with any decency was her teacher. And after learning this and becoming closer with Stella, Glustar finally had a goal in mind and something he could work toward. The only problem is that he needs money, and he's willing to keep making these deals against her wishes as long as it pushes him toward that goal. So, pop quiz. If you're in one organization and you sell information to an enemy organization, what may happen as a result? If you guessed the enemy organization invades, you'll be right on the money, which is why Glustar did exactly that. He wasn't the only hunter leaking information, but he was just as responsible for the Arcs invading the lab. And with the state that it's in following the attack, things reach a pretty bad point between the two hunters. Stella caught on that Glustar was selling information to the Arcs, but because of the trust she had in him, she couldn't bring herself to tell anyone. Meanwhile, Glustar is found in a state of shock following the attack, saying that Stella hasn't said a word to him since. With his actions weighing down on him, he's left wondering if he should just turn himself in and face the consequences. But later on, you hear from Stella that she'll forgive Glustar for his actions, even if no one else will. But for now on, the money they'll make for his dream will be done by the books, and an equal effort between the two of them. Despite things being mostly back to normal in the lab, Glustar knows he has to make up for what he's done, and he shares with you more about what his dream is. He got it from an old war buddy he once had, but at this point he's since passed away. His friend's dream was to help raise the social standing of both Newman and humanoids, citing their current treatment being akin to second-class citizenship. Being a former teacher, his buddy wanted to give them a better education, but ultimately that's not how things went. Glustar then tried to make that dream his own, pursuing gambling and dirty jobs in order to accomplish it. But after meeting Stella, a defective humanoid who wants to help him make that dream possible, it finally clicked and became a real goal for him. To finish the story, Stella shares with you that she and Glustar want to be by each other's side as family. Once all the official business wraps up here, they have plans to live on the surface, and Stella hopes to see you again in the future. Glustar shares with you that his goal is to build a school to provide better education for humanoids and Newman. And that's how it ends. If you play as either of those races, be sure to thank Glustar and Stella when you see them. Now I hope you're ready for some more misery, because it's time for the next story. This one takes place on the Arc side between two humanoids. The first is Ohgun, a peaceful man who loves nature and just wants the conflict on Ragal to end. He's no fan of getting into fights, but is willing and able to use his own body to defend others. His counterpart is Reiz, who sounds like the exact opposite of him. Reiz is a combat humanoid with a keen ability to analyze data in the middle of battle. She requests that you send the two of them together when possible, since she's fine being the violent one between the two of them. They also appear to already be familiar with each other, with Ohgun sharing that Reiz used to help repair damaged humanoids before joining the Arcs. He doesn't quite know where those humanoids came from, and Reiz adds that she can't remember anything from before then either. They make a unique pair, but I guess casts gotta stick together sometimes. Later on, Reiz asks if you recall the OPSS incident, which, while it isn't directly shown in the game, is brought up multiple times in both storylines. This is covered more in my other video, but to summarize, well, the Pioneer 2 government decided to enact some radical population control laws since they haven't settled on Ragol yet. So you take this idea and sprinkle in some societal problems we learned from Glustar, and what do you get? The government blasting thousands of humanoids into orbit. I mean, sure, humanoids were since granted basic rights and are no longer called androids, but the repercussions of that massacre are still felt 7 years later. Reiz's memory problems also start happening around that time, so she has no idea what happened pre-OPSS. As the game progresses, she starts getting flashes of her memory regarding the Central Dome, an android repairman, and the OPSS incident. Reiz feels like she's becoming less effective in combat, and her memory flashes are becoming a serious concern. She thinks returning to that place around the Central Dome will help her learn about where this gap in her memory came from. Ohgun also starts to pick up on her acting differently than usual, and can't help but wonder if he did something to offend her. To be honest, he and Teifu I think would really get along. But when Reiz comes back from the Central Dome, she shares with you what she now remembers and what was covered up. The truth about her existence is, she was created to help carry out the OPSS incident on the surface. The government was blasting humanoids out into space, but there were still others that were already on Ragol, and Ohgun just happened to be on the surface as the massacre was being carried out. But Reiz now remembers seeing him, surrounded by the dismantled parts of his friends, unable to do anything but cry. And to Reiz at the time, the sight of seeing something so heartbreaking broke through her programming that said to kill him, and it effectively gave birth to who she is now, a person rather than a program. The last thing she recalls is carrying a weeping Ohgun on her back, finding that android repairman, and requesting the two of them get memory wiped. Of course, this only appears to have worked on Ohgun, as he has no recollection of either of their past actions, but seeing how much of a rut she's in makes him realize how much he's emotionally dependent on her, so he takes it upon himself to no longer simply wish for peace on Ragol, but to work toward it in any way he can. Ohgun's words serve as an eye-opening moment for Reiz, who no longer wants to be weighed down by her past actions, and instead work toward a better future. And that's how it goes for the both of them. Reiz is also one of the few side characters that plays a major part in one of the cutscenes. She talks with Lura, one of the main characters, about her dreams for peace, but she doesn't see herself as an admirable person. Reiz shares her thoughts about pursuing your own happiness in life and how it, in turn, makes those around you happy. Lura ends up having a hard time comprehending her solid facts and logic though. But yeah, that's the story. It's a very hopeful ending, which I think the two of them definitely deserve. Ohgun also saves a Ragrappy that was hurt, so boom, peace is established. And with that, the three biggest side stories are out of the way. The remaining stories focus on individuals rather than groups, but they aren't as in-depth as these were. Let's get into it. Next up on the list is a real mean son of a gun on the Arc side, a gunner named Rio. You may know her from such hits as the Dodge Card. She doesn't like you at first and clearly doesn't trust your judgment as a commander. But as the game goes on and you continue to do more missions, you start to impress her a little bit. Not that she would ever admit it, of course. Around the time the OPSS incident gets brought up, she gives you the mega lore dump and really makes a convincing point that, hey, maybe the Pioneer 2 government should be taken down a notch or 2 or 10. She's also very excited once the invasion on the lab is about to begin and tells you that she's got a few other places that she's gonna visit instead. And following that attack, Rio goes a step further and shares that her personal goals aren't exactly the same as the Arc's. She's not looking for peace on Ragol or anything so majestic like that. The details are pretty light here, but the squad she used to be in was nearly entirely wiped out due to some betrayal that happened in the ranks, and the incident was then swept under the rug by the political bigwigs, leading to most people forgetting it even happened. But to her, that squad was the only family and the only life that she had. Which leads to her goal, which is revenge on each of the politicians that sat back and let the massacre get carried out. Near the end of the story, Ryo says that the real fight will start after this whole card business is taken care of. She wants the entire Pioneer 2 government eliminated. But it's not all doom and gloom. She finally sees you as worthy of being her commander. You better be careful with your words though, or else you might end up being an accomplice to whatever she has planned. After Ryo is what you may think of as another mean son of a gun, this one named Rufina. You could think that if you wanted to be mean to her, which you shouldn't. She catches you staring at her eye patch and starts to feel self-conscious about it. Rufina tells you it's the result of an accident she was in and it's hiding a synthetic eye underneath, but it won't get in the way of any on-the-ground Ark's business. Something she brings up a lot is how she has a lot of respect for Break, one of the leading members of the Arks, and makes reference to how he once saved her from an unspecified dark past that she had. For anyone out there with an I can save her mindset, I think this character might be up your alley. Rufina starts to act a little off once the attack on Pioneer 2 is about to start. She says she's not too good around research labs, but with Break leading the operation, she promises to not be a liability. Following the attack, her condition clearly hasn't improved, and she starts to open up on why places like that make her feel uneasy. So the following reveal is a very big spoiler for the episode 3 plot, so if you have any plans on playing this game for yourself or learning about the story in its entirety, this would be one to skip. The reason why Rufina is so uneasy around labs is because she was actually an experiment in the government's cloning laboratory. She doesn't know if she's the original Rufina or merely a clone of her, but Break was the one who ended up initially saving her from that place. So this whole invasion ends up reminding her of her origins, and she starts to have a bit of an identity crisis. As the story progresses, she eventually wants to confront her past and investigate the cloning facility she was held in. This was probably for the best considering the alternatives, but when Rufina checked the place out, it was completely empty and abandoned. But not seeing any evidence of clones or any research notes actually gives her a sense of closure. To her, it doesn't matter if she's the original or if she's a clone, because at the end of the day, she's her own individual. The moment Break bailed her out of that lab, Rufina became her own person rather than an experiment. If you know the main story of this game, you'll know that cloning generally never ended up with any happy campers, but seeing one person not being completely ruined by it is a nice change. And now, the part that we've all been waiting for, the characters that are certainly in the game and can be talked to. Don't get me wrong, I like all of the characters in this game, but if we're going by personal development throughout the story, there's not much here. To start off, for anyone out there that likes Ojo-samas, you're in luck because it's time to meet Creinu. She's one of the founding members of the Arks, but prefers to leave the fighting to other people. Creinu let slip that it would be a real damn shame if all this technology had to be destroyed once the fighting is over, but don't think about that too much. Later on, she convinces you to check out a place on the surface that holds this gem that somehow radiates energy, but once she gets it, she's only interested in how it matches her outfit. By the way, you also made up that whole thing about it radiating energy. Maybe you should lie down and not think about the little details too much. But that's really it for Creinu. She plays more of a role in the main story and drops a lot of lore later on, but she doesn't really go through a character arc. And honestly, that fits her. She is an Ojo-sama after all. Why would she need to change for anyone? Man, I hope you worked up your appetite watching this video, because our next character is Peko. He's hungry. He's really hungry. He had some sweets, but Memoru took half of them. If you remember that one quest in episode 1 where you meet the three sisters baking cakes deep underground, you'll be happy to learn that they're still at it. Not as happy as Peko is though. He ends up using card technology to make temporary copies of the cakes so he can just eat them whenever he wants. But we surprisingly do learn a little about him, in that he was taken into the Arks at a young age. His pseudo-mother is a woman that we never meet named Susan, who is also Creinu's older sister, so you can probably imagine what she's like. Susan isn't too happy to see Peko eating cloned sweets all day, so she puts him on a diet. As time goes on, she ends up loosening the restrictions on the diet and says he can help himself to those wonderful cakes once again if he works really hard for the Arks. And that's it. I know, pretty thrilling stuff. Similar to Creinu, he's more active in the main story, so if you're itching for more Peko content, you can check him out there. And if that was emotionally gripping, well, you better hold on to your seat there, Buster, because we got Hyze ready to go. Hyze is a rock musician who is much better suited playing as a bard than rolling a fighter. He gets into a funk because he was originally built for music, but his voice modulator got changed when he was modified for combat. So his new pleasant sounding voice doesn't match his rock and roll persona, you dig? As a result, he decides to ditch the whole rock thing and try singing with his new voice, which isn't set to be musically pleasant and is apparently very funny to listen to. So as a result, Hyze makes a decision. If he can't make people rock, he'll make them laugh. All that matters to him is that he puts everything into his music and the world becomes a better place because of it. I think we should all aspire to be like Hyze. Next up on the list is everybody's favorite old soul, it's Casey. He's one of Break's old comrades and was with him when they first saved Rufina. He focuses particularly hard on how she continues to have a lot of admiration toward Break, despite it not being reciprocated. Such thoughts are not the way of the warrior, Casey. Stay strong. As Rufina's story continues, Casey starts to notice her not doing too well and ponders what he can do to help. When she goes off on her own to find some answers, he secretly follows her to keep her safe, and never tells her that he was there to protect her. Casey ultimately resigns this to be the path he chooses to walk in life, never to share his feelings with Rufina, but always keep her safe. And that's his story! But on the bright side, he also has one of the best lines of dialogue in the game, where he simply does not know what computers are. Alright, finally, the moment I know you've been waiting for, the emotionally gripping tale of the man they call Guykild. Thankfully, he has a little dude who translates for him, but he doesn't treat this little dude too well. From what I can gather, Guykild is a humanoid built for combat who, up to this point, has only lived through the orders he was given. He also doesn't like other humanoids, so maybe he was built similar to Reiz, but that's never really explained. Either way, after enough violent outbursts and threats against children, Guykild eventually breaks through whatever commands that were leading him and he can finally start making his own choices. I guess. But hey, if the little dude is happy, then we're all happy. So those are all the remaining characters I didn't cover before. Clearly some had more love put into them than others, but I was a fan of seeing how they all changed throughout the game. Ultimately, I wish some of them were fleshed out a little more or took place outside of just dialogue. I feel like if the game had a bigger budget or wasn't a turn-based card game, some of these stories could have been a lot more impactful. But that's kind of a Phantasy Star Online tradition. You're not a part of all these big events, but you live in the world that resulted from them. The Hunter Training Center, your OPSS, or the various incidents happening within the government, they only exist within the dialogue of the game, but by talking to these characters, it explains why things are the way they are. It's not flashy or exciting, but it feels more real because of it. Or this could all just be one big cope from the biggest Episode 3 apologist.